Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. I'll never grow tired of the stories where a customer rage quits their account only to wonder why their account doesn't work later. Ask and ye shall receive. Close your bank account? Yes, sir. So this happened a few years ago, but I love telling this story. Short background. I work at a local credit union, similar to a bank, in back office support. Most of my direct customer contact is through the online chat and message systems. I've never worked in a branch. So one day I get a message from this dude demanding to know where his new debit card is. Not asking, demanding. I check and let him know that it was mailed about 2 weeks ago and he should have it by now, but I would happily mail him a new one. Or he could come into a branch and we could print him a new one on the spot. He asks to have one mailed. I verify his address. He was less than a 10-minute walk from one of our branches and maybe a 5-minute drive, but whatever. You want to wait for the mail? Be my guest. And mail him a new card, thinking that was the end of it. Nope. A week later, he messages back, enraged that he's not gotten his card yet. I let him know it takes about 5 to 10 business days. They're sent regular mail. We have no tracking on them, etc., and he's welcome to come into a branch and get one printed right now if he would like. He was not a fan of that. Tells me I personally have caused him to get fees. Look at the fees. They have nothing to do with the card. They're all online gambling sites linked directly to his account and routing number, and that I need to refund all $200+ of fees. This would be in addition to the $100 we've already refunded for the year. Here's the thing. If you ask me nicely, I'll probably move heaven and earth to get fees refunded, even if we've already refunded the max limit for you that year. We're all human, I get it, and I do feel that some fees charged are stupid and morally objectionable. If you demand I refund your fees, the odds of those getting refunded just drop by like 99%. So I tell him I will not be refunding his fees, and he cusses me out. Always makes me laugh when I get cussed out over chat and messages because someone took the time to type that ish out and capitalize it, and tells me to just effing close his account then if I refuse to help him. So there are a few things that we need to send a request to close an account. The account needs to be positive, his was, but barely, have no loans on it, including credit cards, not have a balance of over a certain amount, no danger there, and we need their addresses verified, which he had done when I sent him a new card. So I say, I'm sorry to see you go, but I understand that you need to do what's best for you financially, and I send the request to close his account, and then I wait. A week or so later, I get a call from a teller at a branch. They have this gentleman in front of them outraged that his account was closed and asking what happened. I let the teller know that he sent a profane request to close the account, so I sent the request to our back office to be processed. She relays this, and he starts calling me a liar, telling the teller that he never cussed at me and he for sure never asked to close the account. Not sure if he thought that we just delete messages and have no records. Anyway, I take screenshots of our messages and send them over to the teller and listen as she shows him them on her computer. I can hear her trying not to laugh as he goes, "Oh, well, yes." And she thanks me and ends the call. Later, she messaged me telling me that he apologized for cussing and we reopened his accounts and that she has never had to stifle laughter that hard before. I have a feeling he got the debit cards, but he was just faking it to get more money. That sounds like bank fraud. And our second story. How an accused bookworm found solace in unexpected silence. I had forgotten about this story until the other day when I was chatting with a friend I went to high school with. It was the late 90s. I was still wearing too much flannel and continuing my historical trend of keeping books from the library much too long. I had a paper due for my sophomore global studies class, so I naturally took out more books than I could read, wrote the essay, and completely forgot about the books piled in the corner of my bedroom. After a series of overdue slips sent to my homeroom, I eventually did return the 4 or 5 books one sunny afternoon in the anonymous book drop during study period. Promptly moved on to bigger and better things. About 2 weeks later, I was called down to the assistant principal's office in that space of time before classes officially started that was reserved for one thing and one thing only: the reprobates and delinquents were in trouble. I walked the halls thinking that surely this was just a timing mishap and I was being summoned to receive congratulations for some kind of award I didn't know I'd entered into a competition for. Yep, he just wants to prepare me for the surprise ticker tape parade. I was wholly unprepared to hear that I was receiving lunch detention to start immediately because I had not returned a single book that I still remember was slim and had a white and red cover from my GS paper research. I tried to argue that there was a mistake since I was sure, like I am sure that I have fingertips, that I had returned it. But he could not be moved, and I was sentenced to indefinite lunch detention until I either returned the book or paid the $16 to replace it. I left the office late for first period, defeated, but kept my head held high at lunch later that day as I walked past the entirety of cafeteria, which held a couple hundred of my peers. Plastic food tray in hand, I went down the hall to the old shop classroom that had since been moved and awaiting detention. I checked in with Mrs. Brown at her desk in front and took an inconspicuous seat in the back. Staring down at my canned peach slices, I braced for the worst. A murderous ruckus were going to break out any minute, I could tell. But once my ears stopped ringing, I discovered that it was really a calm escape from the crowded and rowdy lunchroom. I ate slowly that day, enjoyed my young thoughts and blissful quiet, and wondered what kind of heaven was this. To be fair, I did search far and wide for that book that first day. Attempts to find it in my locker, bedroom, and backpack were fruitless, and the general consensus in my home was that the school was being ridiculous. I certainly wasn't going to pay for something I didn't lose, so the next day, considering my brief brush with the law and the invisible stain already attached to my reputation, I went armed with a book and my lunch past the maddening crowds to the detention room. I sat there day after day for nearly 2 months of lunches. In retrospect, to this day, those remain some of the most relaxing lunch breaks of my life. I had around 40 solid minutes to recharge in mostly complete silence with my reasonably priced lunch and whatever book I was currently reading. I had to recount my origin story a few times since no one could figure out how the quiet bookworm of a girl who'd never been in trouble before had landed in the wilds of detention, but I was mostly left to my own devices in this newly found peaceful retreat. I was friendly with Mrs. Brown, who had worked for the district of my small town since I was in elementary school, and even hooked her up with a sweet horse whisperer poster that she loved from my family's mom and pop video store. She must have felt bad for me because somewhere around the 1-month mark, he started up a collection to cover the cost of the book. She added the initial donation, but teachers who would stop by to chit-chat would add loose change to it, and Race to Buy My Freedom was on. After a few weeks, she handed me just under $7. My love of solitude was no match for the guilt of carrying around that money, or my mom, who'd just started a new job in the school district. So with a heavy heart, I paid in full for the missing book and went back to my old lunch table in the thick of the action. Months later, during the last week of school, I was called down to the library at my convenience, and with sweaty palms, forced myself to face the music over what was inevitably going to be yet another overdue book at the end of the day. Well, lo and effing behold, the end-of-the-year inventory check had located the book as waylaid in the wrong section of the library. I received a few sheepish looks from the librarians as they refunded the money and apologized in a backward way that still made me the bad guy, as overdue books are the real blemish on one's character. So how were they to assume that I didn't lose the book? Remember my mom's new job in the school? Well, she just happened to be walking by the library just as I was finishing up, and to say that she laid into them is far too extreme sounding, but she did scold some stern-faced librarians into giving me a proper apology. She also demanded that they look into reforming their system and, my favorite part, take the proper measures to expunge my record. She was very concerned about me carrying around the albatross of false accusation, apparently. And just like that, my life of crime was over. Your mom's intervention and demand for a proper apology are the icing on the cake. And our next story. Don't be a butt to your support staff. I worked as a receptionist for 2 years, and 90% of our business was walk-ins, since we usually were too busy to have appointments. The office consisted of 2 office staff and 5 main professional staff. Don't want to specify. It was a stressful job, but it was a good way to get my foot in the door. One particular professional looked down on the office staff and made our lives difficult every day. Examples include regularly telling us she wouldn't be seeing any customers due to headaches, would make passive-aggressive jokes and be upset when we didn't laugh because they weren't funny, trying to blame us when customers lied about what services they needed during check-in, calling the front desk to yell about how many customers are waiting. All of the professionals had access to the electronic waitlist information, disappearing for chunks of time between customers to avoid seeing more customers, keeping customers checked in on the electronic list to avoid seeing more customers, would be busy with projects when it was their turn to work late, so we'd have to turn away customers. They never got fired because we had a hell of a union, so she was constantly on probation and did the bare minimum. I left that job a year ago and found another job within the same organization. Someone in our department is preparing to retire soon, and we were discussing possible internal promotions. There's a position former coworker has coveted for a while, and it's really hard to get into due to limited spots. Someone brought up former coworker and asked if anyone had experience working with her. I kept it brief, but basically explained they'd be a horrible fit and I would never recommend her. Moral of the story, you never know who will make or break you in the future. And our last story. HOA Hysteria, when a landscaping bill turns into a homeowner's nightmare. My family owns a landscaping business that does the majority of its work in HOA communities, including landscaping the common grounds for 2 HOAs. One spring, we go out and stop by one of our customers' houses to see if they want us to continue our mowing service this year. No answer at the door and no return calls from their cell number we had on file. A couple weeks later, the HOA calls us and asks us to mow the property and that the HOA would pay us, then bill the owner when they could get a hold of her. We do this the entire year. Come winter, we get a notice that the HOA would like us to appear at one of the meetings to discuss our upcoming contracts. While at the meeting, we learn that the HOA is trying to foreclose on this house for their landscaping bill when another resident asks us how we can live with ourselves charging so much money for just cutting grass. I was flabbergasted. Our entire bill for the year to the HOA was like $400 or $500 for this house. They then turned around and roped it up to about $5,000 with fines and lawyer fees and were applying to have the place sold. The owner wasn't even behind on their dues since they were set up on autopay. The meeting descended into absolute effing chaos with residents and board members yelling at each other. Turns out the woman whose house it was had traveled back to her home country for about 8 months to take care of her family back home. Several of her neighbors knew where she was and were checking up on the place every few weeks. They told the board what was happening and when she would hopefully be back in their country. These butt clowns on the board were trying to have her house sold out from under her before she would return. I think the only person on the HOA that survived re-election was the treasurer, who hadn't been involved at all and was a pretty nice and laid-back guy. It's a relief to hear that at least one reasonable person remained on the HOA board. Hopefully this experience serves as a wake-up call for the entire community. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.